Out on the north fence line, where the Wyoming wind never stopped screaming, the world was made of rock and wire, and a sky so big it could swallow a man whole. For Nathaniel Vance, that was all he had left: the ranch, his father, and the silence. 6 months. That's how long it had been since they buried his mother on the hill. 6 months since the laughter in their little clapboard house had died and been replaced by a quiet so heavy it felt like being buried alive. He and his father, Owen, they were like two ghosts. They worked side by side from sunup to sundown, their bodies moving in the same rhythm of chores, but they never spoke. Not really. Their only language was fence posts that needed mending and water troughs that needed filling. His father's grief was a stone wall. Nathaniel's was a caged animal, pacing and clawing at his ribs in the dead of night. It was a slow, quiet death, the death of a family, the slow bleeding out of hope, and Nathaniel was sure it would go on like that forever, until he heard the sound. It was faint at first, almost stolen by the wind, a thin, wavering cry that wasn't coyote, wasn't hawk, wasn't anything he'd ever heard before. It was human. He reined in his horse, anchor, and listened. The wind howled, and for a second he thought he'd imagined it, a trick of the lonely landscape. Then it came again, weaker this time, desperate. He nudged anchor off the trail, his gut tight with a feeling he couldn't name. The land here was mean, full of sudden drops and hidden ravines. He followed the sound, his eyes scanning the broken earth, and that's when he saw it. A deep, shadowed cut in the ground. A place where the world just fell away. And at the bottom, a horse, twisted, unnatural, dead. Pinned beneath that mountain of dead flesh was a person, and the cold knot in Nathaniel's stomach cinched so tight he could barely breathe. He was off his horse in a flash, tethering anchor to a gnarled pine as he scrambled down the treacherous slope. Loose rocks skittered away from his boots, echoing in the sudden, terrible quiet. The closer he got, the worse it was. The horse's eyes were glassy, vacant. The person was a woman, her dark hair splayed in the dust. He couldn't see her face. He saw no movement, no sign of life. He was too late. "Ma'am?" he called out, his voice cracking from disuse. Nothing. Then, a flicker of movement, a low moan that was half pain, half air. She was alive. He reached her side, kneeling in the dirt. He could see her face now. She was native, her skin the color of warm clay, her features smeared with grime. Her eyes were closed, her breathing a shallow, ragged thing. He touched her free shoulder, gently. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open. They were dark, clouded with pain, but in their depths he saw a spark. A flicker of a fire that refused to go out. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Then he saw her leg, trapped and crushed beneath the dead horse. He saw the cracked lips, the feverish glint in her eyes. She'd been here a day, maybe more, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had to move the horse. It was impossible. The animal weighed over 1,000 pounds. He had his rope, his horse, and his own 2 hands. It wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. But as he stood, ready to give up before he even started, her eyes locked onto his, and in them he saw a silent, desperate plea, a single unspoken word: help. He was her only chance. And in that desolate, forgotten ravine, Nathaniel Vance made a choice that would bring a war to his doorstep and change his world forever. "I'm going to get you out," he said, the words feeling like a vow. "Just hold on." The work was brutal. It was a fight against gravity, against death itself. He threw his rope around the dead horse's neck and scrambled back up the incline. He looped the other end around the pine tree, using its solid trunk as an anchor. Then he began to pull. His muscles screamed. Sweat poured into his eyes, blurring his vision. His boots slipped on the loose scree, sending him crashing to his knees more than once. Every inch was a victory paid for in blood and pain. Down in the ravine, the woman watched, her face a mask of agony. He was just a boy against a mountain, but he refused to break. He hauled, he grunted, he swore at the sky, at the horse, at his own weakness, and slowly, impossibly, the dead weight began to shift, inch by agonizing inch. It felt like a lifetime. The sun bled across the sky, turning the clouds to fire, and finally, with one last, desperate heave that tore the muscles in his back, it was enough. The pressure was off her leg. He slid back down the slope, his body trembling, his lungs on fire. Her leg was a swollen, bruised mess, twisted at a sickening angle. But he ran a gentle hand over it and felt a wave of relief. It wasn't broken. Her shoulder, though, was another story. Dislocated. The joint sat high and wrong. She hissed in pain as his fingers brushed it. "All right," he murmured, his voice soft. "Let's get you out of here." Getting her up the slope was a new kind of hell. She was weak as a kitten, leaning all her weight on him. He half carried, half dragged her, his arm locked around her waist. She was so light, almost nothing, but she fought. With every step, he felt her will, her refusal to give up. When they reached the top, they collapsed next to Anchor, gasping for air. He gave her his canteen, and she drank like a woman who had been staring death in the face. He had one choice. The town, Prescott, was a day's ride away. She'd never make it. His ranch was closer. Hours, but it was the only shelter there was. The thought of his father's face made his blood run cold. Owen Vance didn't do complications, and this woman, a stranger, an Indian, was the biggest complication he could imagine bringing home. He lifted her onto Anchor's back and mounted behind her, his arms a cage to keep her from falling. As they started the long, slow ride, he could feel the fragile warmth of her body against his chest, a tiny flame in the vast, cold darkness. He was riding straight into a storm. He knew it. He was bringing chaos to the quiet, grieving order of his world. But looking back at the dark scar of the ravine, he knew he couldn't have left her. His mother wouldn't have. And for the first time in 6 long months, Nathaniel felt like he was doing something that was his. A choice made not from duty, but from a sliver of something he thought he'd lost. It wasn't until the lonely lights of the ranch house appeared in the distance that the woman stirred against him. She had been a dead weight for hours, lost in a fever dream. Now she pushed herself up slightly, her voice a dry rasp in the night. "They're coming for me," she whispered. Nathaniel frowned, pulling Anchor to a halt. The wind whipped her hair across his face. "Who's coming for you?" She didn't answer. Her body went rigid, her head snapping towards the trail behind them. He followed her gaze, but saw nothing but rolling darkness. "There's no one there," he said, trying to soothe her. "It's just the wind." "No," she insisted, her voice gaining a sharp edge of terror. "He will find me. He will not stop." A chill that had nothing to do with the night air snaked down Nathaniel's spine. This wasn't just a riding accident. She wasn't just lost. She was running. He urged Anchor forward, his mind racing. Who was he? What had she done, or what had been done to her? The questions piled up, each one darker than the last. He was no longer just a rescuer. He was hiding, a fugitive. When they finally reached the yard, the front door creaked open, spilling a long, accusing rectangle of light onto the dust. His father stood there, a silhouette of judgment. "What have you done?" Owen's voice was flat, dead. "Found her in the North Ravine," Nathaniel said, swinging down and gently lowering the woman to the ground. She swayed, and he caught her. "She's hurt bad, Pa." Owen's eyes swept over her, taking in the buckskin dress, the dark hair, the exhausted, terrified face, and his expression, already hard, turned to granite. He wasn't seeing a person. He was seeing a problem. "This is our home," Owen said, his voice like rocks grinding together. "Not a mission for strays." She would have died, Nathaniel shot back, a defiance he hadn't felt in years rising in his chest. I wasn't going to leave her. She brings trouble, Owen said, his eyes never leaving the woman. I can smell it on her, like smoke. Before Nathaniel could argue, the woman spoke. Her voice was weak but clear. He's right, she whispered, her dark eyes finding Owen's in the dim light. Trouble follows me. You should leave me. But Owen didn't move. He just stared at her, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. It was as if he was looking through her, at a ghost from his past. The standoff stretched, the silence thick with unspoken history. Finally, with a sigh that sounded like the collapse of something old and heavy, Owen stepped back from the doorway. Bring her in, he said, the words clipped and grudging. But any trouble she brings, it's on your head. Nathaniel carried her inside. The house smelled of wood smoke and old memories. He laid her on the cot in the small spare room, a room that had been empty since his mother died. He lit a lamp, and in its soft glow, her eyes fluttered open. Winona, she whispered. It was the first time she'd said her name. Nathaniel, he replied. He brought her a glass of water and went back to the main room. His father was staring into the cold fireplace, his back a rigid line of disapproval. But as Nathaniel watched, his father did something strange. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket. He stared at it for a long moment, before snapping it shut and shoving it back in his pocket. It was a locket Nathaniel had never seen before. The silence in the house had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with a stranger, a secret, and the chilling certainty that the trouble Owen had smelled was already in their yard, just waiting for the sun to rise. The trouble started as a whisper. A prospector maybe saw Nathaniel's tracks leading from the ravine, saw the signs of a second person. In a town like Prescott, a secret was a lit match in a dry barn. The talk started in the saloon. An Indian woman, on Vance land. The speculation turned ugly, fast. She was a thief, a scout for a raiding party, a danger. But at the ranch, a strange, quiet rhythm began. Winona's recovery was slow. A fever clung to her, and her leg kept her bound to the small room. Nathaniel became her nurse. He learned to pop her shoulder back into place, the sound a sickening crunch that made his stomach turn, following her gasped instructions in a mix of Lakota and broken English. He brought her broth and clean water. He did it all under his father's heavy, silent watch. Owen never spoke to Winona. He called her the woman. But Nathaniel saw him watching her. He saw him notice the way she kept her small space clean, the way she mended the tear in her dress with thread pulled from an old burlap sack, her stitches tiny and perfect. One afternoon, Nathaniel found his father standing in the doorway of her room. Winona was asleep, the afternoon light soft on her face. Owen's expression was a tangle of suspicion and something else, something that looked like recognition. As Winona grew stronger, she and Nathaniel started to talk. She told him she'd been separated from her family in a rock slide. The story felt thin, rehearsed. Her eyes never met his when she told it. She wouldn't say where her family was from or where they were going. Her past was a locked door, and Nathaniel was beginning to think something terrible was on the other side. One night, a storm blew in, trapping them in the house. The wind howled like a banshee. Owen sat sharpening a knife, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone setting Nathaniel's teeth on edge. Winona was polishing a small, tarnished silver locket she wore around her neck. My mother's, she said softly, holding it out. My father gave it to her. Nathaniel took it. It was worn smooth from years of touch, and as he held it, he felt a strange sense of déjà vu. He looked at his father, but Owen's face was in shadow. Then Winona pointed to a tiny, almost invisible inscription on the back. It wasn't a name. It was a symbol. A single stylized feather, crossed by a lightning bolt. Nathaniel's blood went cold. He had seen that symbol before, years ago. It was the brand for the McBride Cattle Ranch, the biggest, most powerful ranch in the county. A ranch run by a ruthless man who saw the world in terms of what he could take. Why would Winona's mother have a locket with the McBride brand? This symbol, Nathaniel said, his voice low. Where did it come from? Winona snatched the locket back, her eyes wide with a fear so profound it stole his breath. It is nothing, she said, her voice tight. A pretty mark. She was lying. He knew it. And across the room the sound of the whetstone stopped. His father was staring at them, his knuckles white where he gripped the knife. The look on his face wasn't suspicion anymore. It was certainty. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one that had just broken inside their house. The name McBride was a curse in this valley, and for some reason Owen Vance looked like he'd just seen a ghost walk through the door. The trouble hadn't followed Winona here. It had been waiting for her all along. The trouble arrived the next afternoon. It had a name, McBride. He rode into their yard like he owned it. The town sheriff, a man named Hale, trailing behind him like a well-trained dog. McBride was a big man with a red face and eyes as cold as a snake's. He looked down at them from his horse, a sneer twisting his lips. "Vance," McBride said, skipping the pleasantries, "heard you're harboring a squaw." The slur hung in the air, thick and ugly. Beside him, Owen stiffened, but his face was a blank mask. "We have a guest," Owen said, his voice level. "A woman who was injured. It's a private matter." "Not when livestock goes missing," McBride shot back. "People are nervous. An Indian woman shows up out of nowhere, doesn't look good. We're taking her back to town for questioning." Nathaniel knew what that meant. A locked cell. No questions asked. He saw Winona's terrified face in his mind. He thought of the locket with McBride's brand. This wasn't about stolen cattle. This was about her. "She's not going anywhere," Nathaniel said, the words out before he could stop them. "She's done nothing wrong." McBride's cold eyes shifted to him. A slow, ugly smile spread across his face. "The boy's got a soft spot. Listen, Vance, you can do this the easy way, or you can find yourself on the wrong side of your neighbors. This ain't a request." The threat was clear as glass. Ruin, ostracism, worse. Nathaniel looked at his father. Owen's face was unreadable, his gaze fixed on some distant point. This was the moment of truth. His father was a practical man, a man who bent so he wouldn't break. To risk everything for a stranger, it was impossible. But then, Owen took a step forward. "The boy is right," he said, his voice quiet but hard as the winter ground. "The woman is under our roof, our protection. She stays." He let that hang in the air for a moment. "Now, unless you have a warrant from a federal judge, you're on my property. I suggest you leave." Sheriff Hale looked shocked. McBride's face turned a deep, blotchy red. He had expected them to fold. He had expected fear. He hadn't expected this. Two men, a grieving father and his son, standing shoulder to shoulder against him. "This isn't over, Vance," McBride snarled, yanking his horse around. "You'll regret this." He galloped away, the sheriff scrambling to follow. They left a thick, charged silence in their wake, a promise of war. Nathaniel let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He looked at his father, his mind reeling. Why? Why would his father risk everything? Owen didn't look at him. He stared down the trail where the riders had vanished. "Go inside," he said, his voice rough, "and bolt the door." Nathaniel turned, but as he reached the porch, he saw his father's hand go to his pocket. He saw him pull out that tarnished silver locket, the one Nathaniel had never seen before Owen found Winona. He saw his father's thumb trace a symbol on its surface, a single, stylized feather, crossed by a lightning bolt. It was identical to the one on Winona's locket. Nathaniel's world tilted on its axis. His father had a secret. a deep, dark secret that was somehow tied to Winona, to McBride, and to the locket he now held in his hand. The trouble hadn't started when he found a woman in a ravine. It had started years ago, and it was all about to come due. The Vance Ranch became a fortress. They were marked men. A trip to town for supplies was an exercise in silent warfare. Old friends turned their backs. The store owner served them with cold, clipped words. They were outcasts. But inside the house, something strange was happening. The three of them, the grieving father, the lost son, and the hunted woman, started to become a family. Winona, now walking with a slight limp, insisted on helping. She mended their clothes, her stitches neat and strong. She found wild herbs by the creek that made a tea that soothed the cough that had plagued Owen all winter. She started tending to the geraniums his mother had planted, and under her touch, they bloomed brighter than ever. She was bringing life back to a house that had been a tomb. One evening, Nathaniel found his father on the porch, watching Winona feed the chickens. Owen was holding his wife's old gardening trowel, turning it over in his calloused hands. "Your mother," Owen said, his voice thick. "She would have liked this." It was the most he'd said about her in months. Nathaniel sat on the steps. "She would have liked Winona." Owen didn't answer. He just watched as the setting sun cast a golden light on Winona's face. He wasn't seeing a stranger anymore. He was seeing strength. He was seeing resilience. He was seeing the same fire he had loved in his wife. The armor around his heart was starting to crack. But the world outside wasn't finished with them. The peace was just the calm before the storm. Late one night, Nathaniel was woken by a strange noise, a frantic scratching at the back door. He grabbed the shotgun from beside his bed and crept through the dark house. His father was already there, the big Winchester rifle in his hands. Owen put a finger to his lips, then nodded towards the door. Nathaniel flung it open, ready to face whatever was out there. It wasn't one of McBride's men. It was Sheriff Hale, and he was terrified. His face was pale, his eyes wide with panic. He stumbled inside, bolting the door behind him. "You have to get her out of here, Vance," Hale whispered, his voice shaking. "Tonight." "What are you talking about, Hale?" Owen's voice was low and dangerous. "It's McBride," the sheriff stammered. "He's lost his mind. He's not just after the woman anymore. He's after the locket." Nathaniel and Owen exchanged a look. "He knows she has it," Hale continued, wringing his hands. "He knows what it proves. He's coming. Not with a mob this time. He's hired men, killers. He's going to burn this place to the ground and kill anyone who gets in his way." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The missing cattle was a lie. The prejudice was a cover. This was never about a stray Indian woman. It was a hunt. A hunt for the one thing that could destroy McBride. "What does it prove, Hale?" Nathaniel demanded. "What's in the locket?" The sheriff looked from Nathaniel to Owen, his fear warring with a flicker of old loyalty. "You don't know?" He looked at Owen. "You never told him?" Owen's face was grim. He walked to the mantelpiece and took down a small, dusty wooden box. The box where he kept Martha's wedding ring. He opened it, but instead of the ring, he pulled out his own tarnished silver locket. He opened it. Inside, there wasn't a picture. There was a tiny folded piece of paper. A map. "Years ago," Owen said, his voice heavy with a past Nathaniel never knew existed. "Before I met your mother, this land, all of it belonged to Winona's people. The government deeded it to them. The original deed was split into two pieces, hidden in two lockets for safekeeping. One was given to the chief's daughter, the other to a trusted friend." He looked at Sheriff Hale. "A friend named Martha." Nathaniel felt the floor drop out from under him. "His mother?" "McBride's father jumped the claim," Owen continued, his voice turning to ice. "He murdered the chief in cold blood and stole the land. He thought he got both halves of the deed, but Martha had already hidden her piece. She knew what he was. She made me promise to keep it safe, to wait for the right time." The right time. A woman falling out of the sky into their lives. The chief's daughter, Winona. McBride found out about the lockets, Hale whispered. He's been searching for the chief's daughter his whole life, to get the other half of the map and bury the secret forever. He found her, chased her into the mountains, that rock slide. It wasn't an accident. He tried to kill her. The pieces slammed together with the force of a physical blow. The chase, the lies, the brand. His father's strange reaction. His mother's secret. It was all connected. This wasn't just their home. This was a battleground, and they were standing on stolen ground. A dog started barking frantically from a neighboring ranch, a sound of pure alarm. Hale's face went white. "It's too late," he breathed. "They're here." The night exploded. The first shot shattered the front window, showering the room in glass. Nathaniel dove for the floor, his heart hammering against his ribs. This wasn't a mob anymore. This was an army. "Get to the back room!" Owen roared, already firing the Winchester through the splintered doorframe. "Nathaniel, cover the windows!" Gunshots ripped through the thin wooden walls of the house. It was a sound he would never forget, the angry hornet buzz of lead tearing their world apart. He scrambled to a side window, shotgun in his hands, and saw them. Dark shapes moving in the moonlight. At least a dozen men, maybe more, fanning out to surround the house. McBride was there, on his horse, a silhouette of pure evil against the night sky, directing his hired killers. This wasn't about scaring them. This was about erasing them. "Hale!" Owen yelled over the gunfire. "Is there another way out?" The sheriff was huddled in a corner, shaking like a leaf. "No! There's no way out! We're trapped!" Winona appeared in the doorway of the spare room. Her face was calm, her eyes clear. In her hand, she held a small, wicked-looking knife that seemed to appear from nowhere. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was a warrior. "There is a way," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "A storm cellar, under the floorboards in my room." Owen and Nathaniel stared at her. They'd lived here their whole lives. They'd never known about a cellar. "My mother told me," Nathaniel whispered, a memory surfacing from the deep past. "She said it was a secret place, for emergencies." He'd forgotten. In the fog of grief, he'd forgotten so many things. "Go!" Owen commanded, laying down another round of covering fire. "Get her out of there. I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," Nathaniel shouted back. "That's not a request, son." Owen's voice cracked like a whip. "You get her safe. You get that deed safe. You make this right. For your mother." The weight of that command, of his mother's legacy, settled on Nathaniel's shoulders. He looked at Winona, at her determined face. He looked at the cowering sheriff. He had to get them out. He grabbed Winona's arm and pulled her towards the back room. As they ran, a bullet tore through the wall, missing his head by inches. They burst into the small room, and Winona pointed to a loose floorboard under the cot. Nathaniel ripped it up. A wave of cool, damp air rose from the darkness below. A small, rickety ladder led down into the black. "Hale, you first," Nathaniel ordered. The sheriff didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled down the ladder and disappeared. Nathaniel turned to Winona. "Go, I'll be right behind you." She hesitated, her dark eyes locking with his. In that moment, amidst the gunfire and chaos, something unspoken passed between them. A promise. She nodded and started down the ladder. Nathaniel took one last look around the small room. The house was groaning, dying around them. He could hear McBride shouting outside, his voice filled with furious impatience. Then he heard something else, a new sound, a crackling, hissing roar, and he smelled smoke. They weren't just trying to kill them, they were trying to burn them out. The house, his home, the last piece of his mother he had left, was being devoured by flames. He scrambled down the ladder, pulling the floorboard back into place just as the fire burst through the door. a wave of blistering orange heat. The cellar was small and cramped. It smelled of earth and damp stone. Hale was huddled in the corner, muttering to himself. Winona was standing by the far wall, where a narrow tunnel, barely big enough for one person, led out into the darkness. "It should come out by the creek," Nathaniel said, his voice hoarse from the smoke. Above them, the sounds of the battle raged on. The crack of the Winchester, the roar of the fire, the shouts of McBride's men. His father was up there, alone, fighting an entire army to buy them time. He had to go back. He couldn't leave him. "Stay here," he told Winona. "Get Hale out through the tunnel. Get to town. Show them the deed." "What are you doing?" Winona asked, grabbing his arm. Her grip was like iron. "My father is up there." "You will die," she said, her voice flat. "He's my father." Before she could argue, the world above them exploded. A deafening blast shook the cellar, sending dirt raining down from the ceiling. The sounds of gunfire stopped. The roar of the flames intensified. And then, a new sound. The triumphant, ugly laughter of McBride. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. He knew with a sickening certainty what that explosion was. Dynamite. They'd blown the front of the house apart. And his father was inside. A primal scream of rage and grief tore from Nathaniel's throat. He turned, ready to climb back up into the inferno, ready to die, as long as he took McBride with him. But Winona stood in his way. Her face was a mask of sorrow, but her eyes were filled with a cold, hard fire. "No," she said. "Revenge is a fool's game. We survive. We show them the truth. That is how we win. That is how you honor him." Her words were like a bucket of ice water. She was right. Dying here would mean nothing. McBride would win. His father's sacrifice would be for nothing. His mother's legacy would be buried in ash. He looked from her determined face to the dark tunnel, the path to safety, the path to justice. He made his choice. He nodded, the movement sharp, painful. "Go," he said to Hale. The sheriff didn't hesitate, crawling into the narrow tunnel and disappearing. Nathaniel turned back to Winona. The heat from the fire above was becoming unbearable. The ceiling beams were groaning, ready to collapse. "After you," he said. She crawled into the tunnel. He followed, pulling himself into the suffocating darkness. The last thing he saw before the tunnel swallowed him was the cellar filling with smoke and flame. The last thing he heard was the sound of his home, his past, his childhood, collapsing into a pile of burning rubble. His father was gone. His home was gone. All he had left was the woman in front of him, the secret in her locket, and a burning, all-consuming need for justice. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. The tunnel was a coffin. It was tight and dark and smelled of wet earth. Nathaniel crawled on his hands and knees, the rough stone scraping him raw. Ahead, he could hear Winona's steady, rhythmic movements, a small sound of life in the suffocating blackness. Behind them, he could feel the heat of the fire, a malevolent presence chasing them through the earth. Above, he imagined McBride and his men picking through the ashes, searching for their bodies, believing they had won. Let them believe it. They crawled for what felt like an eternity. Every inch was a struggle. His lungs burned, not just from the lingering smoke, but from the grief that was a physical weight in his chest. His father. He saw his face, resolute, standing on the porch, buying them their lives with his own. "For your mother." The words echoed in his head, a final sacred command. He would not fail him. Finally, he saw a sliver of gray light ahead. Fresh air, smelling of pine and damp leaves, filled the tunnel. Winona pushed aside a thick curtain of roots and pulled herself out. Nathaniel followed, emerging from the ground like a man reborn into a nightmare. They were in the thick brush along the creek bed, 100 yards from the smoldering ruin of the ranch. Sheriff Hale was there, leaning against a tree, his face buried in his hands. The sky was beginning to pale in the east. Dawn was coming. Winona didn't waste a moment. She looked at the ruin of the house, her face etched with sorrow, then turned to Nathaniel. Her eyes were hard. "We cannot go to Prescott," she said. "Hale is a coward. McBride owns the town. They will kill us before we can speak a word." She was right. Hale wouldn't stand with them. He'd saved his own skin, but he wouldn't risk it again. "Then where do we go?" Nathaniel asked, his voice raw. "There is another law," Winona said. "The law of the soldiers. Fort Reno is a 2-day ride south. The commander there, Colonel Davies, he is said to be an honest man. He will not be bought by a man like McBride." It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was the only one they had. "We have no horses, no food, no water," Nathaniel said, the sheer impossibility of it crashing down on him. "We have this," Winona said, and she pulled the locket from around her neck. She opened it and carefully removed the folded paper. The second half of the map, the proof. "And we have the will to see it through." Just then, a sound cut through the morning quiet. A horse whinnying softly nearby. Nathaniel's head snapped up. It was Anchor, his horse. In the chaos, Anchor must have broken free and run for the safety of the creek. He was their miracle. "One horse, 3 people," Hale said, his voice shaking. "We'll never make it. McBride's men will be scouring this whole valley as soon as the sun is up." Nathaniel looked at the sheriff, at this broken, terrified man, and he felt nothing but contempt. "You're right, Hale," Nathaniel said, his voice cold as steel. "We won't make it, but I will." He walked over to Anchor, who nuzzled his hand, a small comfort in a world of pain. "What are you saying?" Hale asked, his eyes wide. "I'm saying you're a liability," Nathaniel said. "You'll slow us down, you'll lose your nerve. You can take your chances back in town. Try to explain to McBride how we got away." He saw the terror in Hale's eyes at the thought. "Good." He turned to Winona. "He's right about one thing. 2 of us on 1 horse through rough country. It's too slow. They'll catch us." Winona's gaze was steady. She understood. "One of us has to be a decoy," she said. It wasn't a question. "I can lead them away," Nathaniel said. "I know this land better than any of them. I can give you a head start. You take Anchor. You take the deed. You ride for Fort Reno." "No," Winona said, her voice absolute. "This is my fight, my family's legacy. I will not hide behind you. You will ride. You are faster. I will stay. I will lead them on a false trail into the high country." They stared at each other, 2 warriors planning a battle they couldn't possibly win. "They'll kill you," Nathaniel said, the words tasting like ash. "They will have to catch me first," she replied, a faint ghost of a smile on her lips. "I was born in these mountains. They were not." He knew she was right. She stood a better chance on foot in the mountains than he did, but the thought of leaving her, of her facing McBride's killers alone, it was unthinkable. "We do this together," he said, his jaw set. "And we die together," she countered. "And McBride wins. Your father's sacrifice, my family's murder, it will all be for nothing. This is the only way." She held out the folded piece of paper, her half of the deed. "Take it," she commanded. "Ride, and do not look back." He looked at the small, fragile piece of paper. It was the only thing that mattered now. Justice, vengeance, his father's last wish. He took it. His fingers brushed hers, and a current passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice she was willing to make. He pulled himself onto Anchor's back. He felt like a traitor, leaving her behind. But she was right. This was bigger than them. He looked down at her one last time. Her face was calm, resolute. A queen facing down an army. "Winona?" he started, but he didn't know what to say. "Go, Nathaniel Vance," she said softly. "Avenge them all." He dug his heels into Anchor's sides, and the horse leaped forward, splashing through the creek and up the far bank. He did not look back. He couldn't. If he looked back, he knew he would stop, and so he rode. He rode south, away from the smoke, away from the past, carrying the hope of 2 families on his shoulders, while the woman who had saved him in more ways than he could count turned north to face the devil alone. The ride was a fever dream. Nathaniel pushed anchor harder than he ever had before, the horse's lungs burning, its sides slick with sweat. He didn't stop. He didn't sleep. He ate nothing. He was running on pure, uncut grief and a singular burning purpose: get to Fort Reno. He rode through canyons and across open plains, always looking over his shoulder, expecting to see the dust cloud of McBride's riders. But the land remained empty. Winona's gamble had worked. She had drawn them away, leading them on a wild goose chase into the high country. He tried not to think about what was happening to her. He couldn't. If he let himself imagine it, the guilt would cripple him. He had to believe in her strength, in her knowledge of the mountains. He had to believe she was smarter and tougher than the men hunting her. He had to believe she was still alive. He reached Fort Reno on the evening of the 2nd day, a ghost of a man on a half-dead horse. He stumbled past the sentries, clutching the 2 folded pieces of paper, and demanded to see the commander. Colonel Davies was a hard-faced man with tired but honest eyes. He listened to Nathaniel's frantic, smoke-rasped story without interruption. He looked at the 2 halves of the deed, at the map they formed when placed together. He looked at the exhausted, grief-stricken boy in front of him, and he believed him. "This is a civilian matter, son," Davies said, his voice gravelly. "But murder and land theft on this scale, McBride has gone too far. He's created a state of insurrection." He stood and walked to the door. "Sergeant!" he bellowed. "Ready a full company. We ride for the McBride Ranch at dawn." Relief washed over Nathaniel, so potent it almost brought him to his knees. It was happening. Justice was coming. But as the soldiers prepared to ride, a scout galloped into the fort. He'd come from the high country north of the Vance land. He brought news. They'd found a body. A native woman. She'd fought hard. There were signs of a struggle. They found her at the bottom of a ravine. The same ravine where Nathaniel had found her. McBride's men had caught her. They had killed her. The world went silent. The sounds of the fort faded away to a dull roar in Nathaniel's ears. He saw her face, calm and resolute as she told him to ride. Avenge them all. He had failed. He had saved the proof, but he hadn't saved her. A cold, black rage, deeper and more profound than anything he had ever felt, settled over him. It wasn't about justice anymore. It was about vengeance. "I'm riding with you," Nathaniel said, his voice a low, dead thing. Colonel Davies looked at the fire in the boy's eyes, the look of a man with nothing left to lose. He gave a single, sharp nod. They rode out at first light, a column of blue-coated soldiers, a force of righteous fury descending on the valley. They rode with a purpose, with the weight of the law behind them. But Nathaniel rode with the weight of something heavier. The weight of the dead, his mother, his father, and now Winona. They reached the McBride Ranch midday. It was a sprawling, arrogant place, built on a foundation of stolen land and blood. McBride and his men were there, celebrating their victory, drinking in the main house. They never knew what hit them. The soldiers surrounded the house, their rifles ready. Colonel Davies himself kicked in the front door. The look on McBride's face when he saw the soldiers, when he saw Nathaniel standing behind them, was a sight Nathaniel would cherish for the rest of his life. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by the dawning horror of a man whose world had just come to an end. It was over in minutes. McBride's hired guns were smart enough to surrender. But McBride, his face purple with rage and whiskey, tried to make a fight of it. He drew his pistol, a last act of blind defiance. He never got a shot off. Nathaniel, moving on pure instinct, raised his own rifle and fired. The shot echoed across the valley. McBride crumpled to the floor, his own surprise a permanent mask on his dead face. Silence. It was done. Justice. Vengeance. It was all a blur of smoke and blood. The soldiers took the rest of the men into custody. Sheriff Hale was found hiding in the barn, and he sang like a canary, telling them everything, desperate to save his own neck. Colonel Davies walked over to Nathaniel, who was still standing over McBride's body, the rifle smoking in his hand. "It's over, son," the colonel said gently. But as Nathaniel looked down at the man who had destroyed his entire world, he felt nothing. No satisfaction, no peace, just a vast, hollow emptiness. He had won, but he had lost everything that mattered. As the soldiers were securing the ranch, one of the scouts rode up to the colonel, his face grim. "Sir," he said, "you need to see this." He led them to a small, windowless shed behind the main house. It was locked from the outside. The soldiers broke the door down. Inside, huddled in the corner, was a group of people, native men and women, their faces gaunt, their eyes filled with a mixture of terror and hope. They were Winona's people, her family. McBride had been holding them captive, using them to try and force her to give up the locket. They were free now, but their freedom had come at a terrible price. An old woman, her face a beautiful mask of wrinkles, stepped forward. She looked at Nathaniel, her dark eyes seeing deep inside him. "You are the one she spoke of?" she asked, her voice soft. "The one with the heart of a Vance?" Nathaniel could only nod, his throat tight with emotion. "She is not dead," the old woman said. Nathaniel's head snapped up. His heart stopped. "What?" "The body they found," the woman explained. "It was her cousin. She dressed in Winona's clothes to lead the hunters away, to give Winona time to escape. She sacrificed herself, for her people, for the future." Hope, fierce and painful, surged through Nathaniel. Winona. She was alive. She had outsmarted them all. She had beaten them. "Where is she?" he breathed. The old woman smiled, a sad, wise smile. "She has gone to the sacred places in the mountains, to grieve, to heal. She said to tell you that you kept your promise. She said the land is a good place for a new beginning." Nathaniel looked around at the stolen ranch, at the freed people. He looked at the vast, unforgiving Wyoming sky. The land. The deed in his pocket proved it belonged to Winona's people. He had done it. He had honored his father. He had honored his mother. He had made it right. His family was gone. His home was a pile of ash. But for the first time in a very long time, as he stood on that blood-soaked ground, Nathaniel Vance felt the unmistakable stirrings of a new life. He didn't know where Winona was, but he knew he would find her. Their story wasn't over. It was a new beginning, planted in the ashes of the old world. In the months that followed, the valley changed. With McBride gone and the truth of the stolen land revealed, the power dynamic shifted. The federal government, presented with the original deed, honored the claim. The land was returned to Winona's people. Nathaniel stayed. He couldn't leave. He helped them rebuild. He worked the land not as an owner, but as a friend, an ally. He shared his knowledge of ranching, and they shared their ancient wisdom of the earth. He learned to live in a new kind of quiet, one that was filled not with grief, but with the sounds of a community healing. He thought of Winona every day. He searched for her in the faces of her people, listened for her voice on the wind. He would ride out to the ravine sometimes, the place where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. He would look up at the high country, the sacred places, and wonder. Then, one evening in late spring, as he was clearing stones from a field to plant a new crop, he saw a figure walking down from the mountains. A lone figure, moving with a familiar, graceful limp. His heart stopped. It was her. She walked right up to him, her face calm, her dark eyes holding his. She was thinner, and there were new lines of sorrow and wisdom on her face. But she was alive. She was whole. "Nathaniel Vance," she said, her voice the same soft sound he remembered. "Winona," he breathed. They stood there for a long moment, the setting sun casting long shadows across the valley. No other words were needed. Everything they had been through, everything they had lost, and everything they had won was there in that silent gaze. She reached out and took his hand. Her hand was strong, her grip firm. "It is time to plant," she said. Together, they walked back to the small house they had built for him near the creek, not far from the ashes of his old home. It wasn't the house he grew up in, but for the first time, it felt like a real home. The grief was still there, a part of him, a part of them both, but it was no longer a crushing weight. It was a foundation. They had built something new on the ruins of the past, a new family, a new future, a new hope forged in fire and loss. He had been a son, lost in a silent house. She had been a daughter, hunted and alone. But together, in the heart of that wild, beautiful land, they had found their way home. What do you think happened next for Nathaniel and Winona? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice and survival, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.